The scent of rain and old paper filled the attic of the family estate. Maya sat on a dusty Persian rug, surrounded by stacks of cardboard boxes and old photo albums. As a young journalist, she spent her days hunting down headlines, but today she was searching for her own history. Her grandmother, Evelyn, had passed away a month ago, leaving Maya with a single specific inheritance: a weathered leather-bound journal with a tarnished brass clasp. Maya turned the journal over in her hands. The leather was scuffed, the edges softened by decades of touch. Expecting to find a simple collection of old recipes or forgotten family trees, she unclipped the clasp. What she found instead was a meticulous ledger of the heart. On the very first page, written in faded black ink and an elegant, sweeping script, were the words: "For those who come after. We did not live perfect lives, but we loved with absolute devotion. Never forget how much it cost to build this family." As Maya turned the page, she was transported back to the autumn of 1942. The first chapter belonged to her great-grandparents Clara and Julian. They had met on a crowded train platform in London, just weeks before Julian was deployed to the front lines. Clara was a quiet, practical nurse. Julian was a brilliant, sharp-witted engineer with a passion for architectural design. Their courtship lasted only 12 days, but those 12 days forged an unbreakable bond. When Julian was sent overseas, their world contracted into the margins of handwritten letters. "The barracks are cold, Clara," Julian wrote in a letter dated November 1943, "but I carry your last note in my breast pocket. The paper is wrinkled and the ink is smudging from the damp air, but when I read your words, the sound of the artillery fade. I am building a bridge back to you in my mind, one letter at a time." For 3 long years, as the war tore Europe apart, Clara kept those letters in a small tin box under her bed. When a telegram arrived in 1944 stating Julian was missing in action, Clara's family urged her to move on, to accept the harsh reality that so many others had faced. But Clara refused to close the book. She continued to write to him every single Sunday, sending her letters into the void of the military postal service, driven by nothing but an unyielding, stubborn hope. "They tell me you are gone, Julian," she wrote in her final unsent letter, "but I still feel the warmth of your hand on the train platform. I will wait for you at the station every Friday until the war ends. I do not care how long the winter lasts. I know you will find your way back to me." In the spring of 1945, Julian did return, emaciated, scarred, but carrying every single one of Clara's letters in his pack. They had been his lifeline, his structural support through the darkest nights of his life. Maya wiped a stray tear from her cheek as she closed the first chapter. She looked down at her phone on the floor, where a draft message to her partner, Leo, remained unsent. They had been arguing for weeks about long-distance careers, the silence between them growing wider with every passing day. Suddenly, the distance between them felt incredibly small compared to the ocean that had separated Clara and Julian. The legacy of the pen has officially begun. Clara and Julian proved that true love can survive a global war on nothing but paper and hope. But as Maya turns the page to her grandparents' era, she is about to discover that the battles of peace can be just as challenging as the battles of war. Maya turned the delicate page, the ink shifting from her great-grandmother's neat cursive to a bolder, more hurried print. This was the chapter of her grandparents, Evelyn and Richard, beginning in the rain-slicked streets of Chicago in 1968. Unlike Clara and Julian, who were separated by a vast ocean, Evelyn and Richard faced a barrier built entirely of pride and social divide. Evelyn was the daughter of a wealthy industrialist, raised in a world of manicured lawns, prep schools and predetermined expectations. Richard was a first-generation mechanic's son who worked night shifts at a steel mill to pay for his engineering classes. When Evelyn's father discovered their quiet relationship, he delivered an ultimatum: renounce Richard, or leave the family estate with absolutely nothing. Evelyn chose Richard. On a freezing Tuesday morning in November, they married in a county clerk's office with 2 strangers as witnesses. Evelyn wore a simple wool coat, and Richard's hands were still stained with motor oil from his morning shift. Their first home was a drafty one-room apartment above a noisy bakery, where the radiator clanked all night and the windows rattled against the winter wind. The journal entry from January 1970 detailed the absolute weight of their struggle. "We have exactly $4.12 left after paying the rent," Evelyn had written, her ink bleeding slightly into the cheap paper. The wind is howling through the gap in the window frame and we are sharing a single bowl of potato soup. Richard looks so tired. He works 14 hours a day and I know he blames himself for the drafts in this room. But tonight he took my hands, pulled me into the center of the floor, and danced with me to the music drifting up from the bakery below. We have no furniture, no family support, and no safety net. But as long as his arms are around me, I am entirely wealthy. For 5 years they lived on the razor's edge of survival. When Richard's father fell ill, they gave up their tiny savings to pay for his medical care, delaying Richard's dream of opening his own design firm. Yet, despite the exhaustion and the constant pressure of family rejection, their home remained a sanctuary of absolute warmth. They didn't build their life on material security. They built it on a daily, active choice to trust each other. Love is not a feeling we wait to wash over us, Evelyn wrote later in the chapter, her handwriting steadier as the years passed and their life stabilized. It is a stubborn decision to hold the line together when the bank accounts are empty and the world tells you to walk away. Richard didn't give me a mansion, but he built a fortress of trust that no storm could ever shake. Maya slowly closed the journal, her gaze drifting to the window. Outside, the modern city hummed with busy traffic, but her mind was stuck on Evelyn's words. Love is a stubborn decision. Her own conflicts with Leo had always been about career convenience and geographical logistics. They had both been waiting for the perfect moment when their paths would naturally align without any personal sacrifice. But looking at the legacy of her grandparents, Maya realized that a perfect alignment was a myth. True partners didn't wait for a smooth path. They grabbed each other's hands and cleared the brush together. The absolute depth of Evelyn and Richard's sacrifice shows us that true wealth has nothing to do with a bank account, and everything to do with who is standing beside you in the dark. Maya turned the page. The paper here was thicker, the ink transitioning to the dark blue of a modern ballpoint pen. The handwriting belonged to her mother, Helen. This was the chapter of the 1990s. An era of glass skyscrapers, cellular phones, and a fast-paced world where success was measured by how high you could climb. Helen was a rising corporate attorney, and Maya's father, David, was a dedicated pediatrician building his own practice. On paper they were the perfect power couple. They had a beautiful suburban home, 2 promising careers, and a young daughter, Maya herself. But beneath the polished exterior, the foundation was quietly fracturing. As Maya read her mother's entries from 1996, she felt a chill. The warmth that had defined the previous generations seemed to have been swallowed by silence. "We are like 2 ships passing in the night," Helen wrote. The ink pressed so hard into the paper it left deep ridges on the back of the page. "David is always at the clinic and I am buried under litigation briefs. Tonight we sat across from each other at dinner and had nothing to say. The silence in this house is louder than any argument we've ever had." I asked him if he still saw me when he looked at me or if he just saw a roommate who helps pay the mortgage. He didn't answer. He just went back to his files. "I feel so incredibly lonely in a room built for 2. The journal revealed a painful truth Maya had been too young to understand at the time. Her parents' marriage had nearly collapsed not from a lack of love, but from the slow, insidious growth of neglect. They had allowed their professional ambitions to become walls, using their busy schedules as excuses to avoid the vulnerability of admitting they were drifting apart. The turning point came in the autumn of 1998, when David was offered a prestigious position at a hospital across the country. It was his dream job, but accepting it meant Helen would have to resign from her firm just as she was on the verge of making partner. "We stood in the kitchen last night, the air thick with years of unspoken resentment," the entry read. "David told me that if I loved him I would support his dream. I told him that if he loved me he wouldn't ask me to erase mine. We were both so proud, so entirely convinced of our own martyrdom. But then David looked down at his father's old watch, the one Richard gave him, and he started to cry. He said, 'My father worked 14-hour shifts in a steel mill and still danced with my mother in an empty kitchen. I have everything they dreamed of, and I am letting it destroy us.' That night we didn't pack our bags. We sat on the floor and talked until the sun came up. We learned that forgiveness isn't about conceding defeat. It's about realizing that keeping score only means you both lose. David turned down the offer and I took a step back from the partner track. We chose each other not because it was easy, but because our family was worth more than our pride." Maya let out a long, shaky breath, her heart aching with a sudden, profound understanding of her parents' relationship. She had always viewed them as a seamless, unshakable unit, entirely unaware of the storm they had navigated to keep their family whole. She looked at her phone again. Leo had texted her an hour ago, "Can we talk tonight? Just want to know where we stand." For weeks, her pride had kept her from typing a real response. She had wanted him to make the first compromise, to prove his devotion by yielding his career goals to hers. But her mother's words echoed in her mind. Keeping score only means you both lose. The illusion of the perfect couple has been shattered, revealing the raw, beautiful work it takes to keep a marriage alive when ambition threatens to tear it apart. Helen and David chose vulnerability over pride, showing Maya that forgiveness is the ultimate foundation. Maya turned the page, her heart hammering against her ribs. The ink from her mother's final entry gave way to a vast expanse of clean, empty paper. Page after page of soft, cream-colored sheets remained completely blank, waiting for a story that had yet to be lived. But as she let the pages slide through her fingers, a small, folded piece of parchment slipped out from the very back of the book. It was yellowed with age, written in the soft, delicate pencil stroke of her grandmother Evelyn's later years. "My sweet Maya. If you are reading this, it means you are holding the sum of our family's heart. You have read about Clara's hope, my own faith, and your mother's forgiveness. You might think we were extraordinary people, but we weren't. We were just ordinary women who made a stubborn choice to love through the quiet, unglamorous storms. Every generation has its own love story. The final pages belong to you. Do not let fear write your chapter, my darling. Real love is not measured by perfect moments, but by the courage to stand together when the path is entirely unclear. Write your story with courage." A single tear fell, blooming like a tiny star on the empty page before her. Maya looked at her phone. The cursor in her chat with Leo was still blinking, waiting for her response. For months, she had viewed their long-distance career dilemma as a sign of incompatibility, a structural flaw in their relationship. She had been waiting for a guarantee, a perfect risk-free assurance that if she committed she wouldn't get hurt. But Clara had no guarantee on that train platform in 1942. Evelyn had no guarantee in that freezing, empty apartment in 1968. And her parents had to break their own pride to find their way back to each other in 1998. Maya picked up her phone, her fingers moving across the keyboard with a sudden, unshakable clarity. "I'm coming to see you tonight, Leo. We have a lot to talk about, but I want you to know one thing first. I'm not running anymore. We'll figure the rest out together." She slid the old journal into her bag, clipping the tarnished brass clasp shut with a decisive, satisfying click. She didn't know exactly what the future held, or how they would bridge the miles between their careers. But as she walked down the attic stairs and out into the crisp evening air, she knew she was ready. She was ready to take Leo's hand, step onto the blank page, and write the next beautiful chapter in a legacy that would never fade. An absolutely breathtaking, deeply moving conclusion to this multi-generational masterpiece. Maya realized that real love isn't a flawless fairy tale. It's a choice, passed down like a sacred heirloom from one courageous heart to the next. The drive to Leo's apartment took 3 hours, the highway stretching before Maya like a long, dark ribbon under a canopy of summer stars. In the passenger seat, her grandmother's journal rested securely in her bag, a quiet, heavy anchor of history. For the first time in months, the frantic, analytical noise of her journalist mind was completely silent. She wasn't preparing an interview or drafting a lead. She was simply feeling the steady, rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt, each mile bringing her closer to a choice she had avoided for far too long. When she finally pulled up to his brick building, the clock on her dashboard read nearly midnight. She walked up the narrow stairwell, her heart striking a fast, nervous tempo. She reached his door and knocked before she could let her old fears talk her out of it. The door opened almost instantly. Leo stood in the doorway, his dark hair messy, wearing an old t-shirt and holding a coffee mug. His eyes, usually so bright and full of easy humor, were shadowed with exhaustion. But as he looked at her standing there, his jaw dropped slightly, the tension in his shoulders dropping instantly. "Maya?" he breathed, stepping back to let her in. You're actually here. I thought your text was just a promise for later." "I realized later is a luxury we aren't guaranteed, Leo," Maya said softly, stepping into his living room. It was a familiar space, filled with his architectural drafts, stacks of design books, and the comfortable, slightly chaotic energy she had missed so desperately. Leo closed the door, turning to face her, his hands tucked nervously into his pockets. I don't want us to end, Maya. But this new contract in Boston, it's a 3-year commitment. I felt like if I asked you to come with me, I'd be asking you to put your own career in a box. And if I stayed here, I'd always wonder. I know, Maya interrupted gently, stepping into his space until she was just inches away. She reached into her bag and pulled out the weathered leather journal, holding it between them. I want you to see something. Leo looked down, his brow furrowing as he took the journal. He slowly opened the brass clasp, his fingers tracing the elegant, faded ink of Clara's first letters, then flipping through Evelyn's bold print, and finally reaching her mother's modern script. His eyes skimmed the entries, a profound, quiet understanding washing over his face as he realized what he was holding. And then he reached the blank pages. My grandmother left these for me, Maya whispered, her voice warm and entirely steady. For us. Every generation before us faced an impossible choice, Leo. A war, a freezing apartment with $4 to their name, a career sacrifice that felt like defeat. But they didn't survive because their circumstances were perfect. They survived because they decided that being together was the only variable that wasn't negotiable. Leo looked up from the blank cream page, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a sudden, intense heat that made the rest of the world completely fade away. I don't need a perfect plan, Leo, Maya said, her fingers gently wrapping around his collar, pulling him just a fraction closer. And I don't need a guarantee. I just want to write the first sentence of our chapter. Together. Even if we have to write it across 2 different area codes for a little while. Leo let out a breath that was half laugh, half sigh of pure, overwhelming relief. He set the journal down on the table, his arms instantly wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest as he buried his face in her shoulder. I love you, Maya, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'll build any bridge it takes to keep us connected. I swear. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his hands coming up to gently cup her face before he leaned down, sealing their promise with a deep, breathless kiss that tasted of late-night coffee, summer rain, and the beautiful, terrifying thrill of a brand-new beginning. On the wooden table behind them, the journal lay open to the first blank page, no longer representing a void of uncertainty, but a vast, beautiful space waiting for a love that would leave its own footprints for generations to come. An absolutely gorgeous, heartwarming resolution to Maya and Leo's modern struggle. They didn't just solve their problems. They connected their love to a century-old anchor of family resilience, proving that true devotion always finds a way to bridge the gap. 3 years passed like a whirlwind of train tickets, late-night video calls, and red-eye flights. The blank pages of Evelyn's journal were no longer pristine. They were slowly filling with the texture of a modern journey, stubborn, chaotic, and deeply committed. Maya and Leo had spent 36 months bridging the gap between Boston and Chicago. There were nights of bone-deep exhaustion, weekend trips that felt far too short, and moments where the sheer logistics of 2 demanding careers threatened to pull them apart. But every time the doubt crept in, Maya would run her fingers over the weathered leather cover of the journal, remembering the generations of women who had held the line before her. Now the long-distance chapter was finally coming to a close. On a humid afternoon in July, Maya stood in the center of a small, sunlit apartment in Brooklyn. Cardboard boxes lined the hardwood floors, and the smell of fresh paint hung heavy in the air. This was their first truly shared space, a home they had chosen together. The door creaked open and Leo walked in carrying a heavy wooden crate. He looked tired, sweat dampening his collar, but the moment his eyes met hers, his face lit up with that familiar, crooked smile. He set the crate down and walked straight into her arms, burying his face in the crook of her neck. We actually did it, Leo whispered, his arms tightening around her waist. No more security lines. No more saying goodbye at train platforms. The brass clasp was tarnished, and the leather was softer than ever, worn by the hands of 4 generations of women. Is this the magic book, Mommy? Clara asked, her wide green eyes looking up at Maya with pure curiosity. It's better than magic, sweetie, Maya smiled, gently opening the clasp. It's a book of promises. It's the story of how our family was built. Maya flipped through the pages, showing Clara the fading black ink of her great-great-grandmother's elegant cursive, the bold, passionate print of her grandmother Evelyn's entries, and the modern blue ink of her mother's reflections. Finally, she reached the section filled with her own handwriting and Leo's. There were pages detailing their early struggles with the distance, the joy of their wedding day and the chaotic, beautiful nights of bringing baby Clara home from the hospital. "Did Daddy write in here too?" Clara asked, pointing to Leo's steady, structured handwriting. "He did," a deep, warm voice answered from the doorway. Leo walked into the room carrying 2 mugs of warm apple cider. He had a few silver threads at his temples now, but his eyes held the exact same soft, devoted light as the night he had stood in his messy apartment and promised to build a bridge. He set the mugs down and slid onto the rug beside Maya, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her close. "Your daddy promised to always choose your mommy even when the path was hard," Leo whispered, kissing Clara's forehead. "And every day we keep writing that promise." Clara ran her small fingers over the smooth blank pages at the very back of the book. "There are still empty pages left." "There are," Maya said, her voice rich with emotion as she looked at her daughter and then up at Leo. "These pages are waiting for you, Clara. When you grow up and you find the person who makes your heart feel like home, you will write your own chapter." "Will it be a happy story?" Clara whispered. "It won't be perfect," Maya answered softly, resting her hand over Clara's. "There will be storms and there will be hard choices. But if you choose to stand together, to forgive and to never let go, it will be the most beautiful story ever written." Closing the journal, Maya clipped the brass clasp shut. She looked at the family she had built, at Leo, whose steady love was her daily anchor, and at Clara, who carried the hope of the future in her eyes. The footprints of the past had led her directly to this moment, and the echoes of their love would continue to ring out, long after the ink on the pages had dried. The absolute perfect full-circle ending to this breathtaking family legacy. Maya and Leo are passing down the ultimate inheritance, not gold but the courage to love unconditionally, to the next generation. 15 years later, the autumn leaves had faded into the quiet, pristine white of a New England winter. Clara stood by the frost-dusted window of her college apartment, clutching a mug of tea to warm her hands. Outside, the snow was falling in heavy, silent flakes, blanketing the campus in a quiet hush. On the desk behind her lay an open suitcase, half-packed with thick sweaters, textbooks, and a plane ticket to London. She had been offered a prestigious research fellowship overseas, the opportunity of a lifetime. But her heart felt incredibly heavy. A quiet knock at the door broke the silence. Clara opened it to find her father, Leo, standing in the hallway, snow clinging to the shoulders of his wool coat. Beside him was Maya, her eyes warm and crinkling with that familiar, deeply comforting maternal love. "We couldn't let our girl cross an ocean without saying a proper goodbye," Leo said, stepping inside and pulling Clara into a tight, protective embrace. "You drove 3 hours through a blizzard?" Clara asked, a watery smile breaking across her face as she hugged her mother. "Your father would drive through a hurricane if it meant seeing you," Maya murmured, gently wiping a stray tear from Clara's cheek. As they helped her pack the remaining boxes, Maya's eyes fell on the nightstand. Sitting there, looking exactly as it had for nearly a century, was the leather-bound journal. Its brass clasp was worn smooth, a physical testament to the hands that had treasured it. "Have you written in it yet?" Maya asked softly, walking over to touch the leather. Clara looked down at her boots, the anxiety she had been carrying all week finally spilling over. "I tried to. But every time I pick up the pen I feel terrified. I met Julian last semester, Mom. He's brilliant and he makes me laugh, and he's staying here to finish his residency. If I get on that plane tomorrow, I'm putting an entire ocean between us. I don't want to write a story about heartbreak. I don't want to be the generation that fails the legacy." Leo walked over, placing a warm, steady hand on Clara's shoulder. "Clara, look at the first page of that book. Great-grandmother Clara and Julian were separated by a global war. Your mother and I spent 3 years flying back and forth between 2 different cities. The legacy isn't about avoiding the distance. It's about having the courage to build the bridge anyway." Maya gently picked up the journal and placed it in Clara's hands, along with a simple black pen. "The pages aren't empty because we expect you to be perfect, sweetheart," Maya said, her voice rich with a lifetime of learned wisdom. "They are empty because they are yours to write. Fear is just the first page of courage. After her parents left to catch their flight back before the roads closed, the apartment fell silent again. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, the journal resting on her lap. She took a deep breath, unclipped the brass clasp and turned to the first completely blank page. The ink flowed smoothly from her pen as she began to write. Tomorrow I am getting on a plane to London. It is cold, the snow is thick and the person I love most is staying behind on the tarmac. I don't know what the next 3 years will look like. I don't know if the bridge we build will hold. But as I look at the snowy streets below, I realize I am not walking alone. I carry Clara's hope, Evelyn's faith, my mother's forgiveness and my father's steady promise. I am ready to take the first step. She closed the book, a profound, unshakable peace settling over her chest. As she looked out the window, she saw a lone figure walking through the fresh snow toward her building. It was Julian, his collar pulled up against the wind, holding a thermos of coffee and looking up at her window with a bright, hopeful smile. The winter was cold and the ocean was wide, but Clara knew the fire of her family's legacy would keep them warm. What a breathtaking, emotionally perfect conclusion to this legendary multi-generational saga. Clara has officially taken the pen, stepping onto her own blank page with the quiet, powerful courage of the women who came before her. Thank you all so much for taking this beautiful, sweeping journey through time, love, and family with me. Your incredible passion, beautiful personal stories in the comments, and endless support are what make this channel a sanctuary for stories that truly matter. I want to hear from you one last time. Did your heart swell seeing Clara write her very first entry? Do you think she and Julian will build the ultimate bridge across the ocean? Drop a comment below right now and let me know your thoughts. If this entire series touched your heart, please do me one final massive favor. Smash that like button, hit the subscribe button, and turn on your notification bell right now so you never miss our next epic romance release. Live with courage, cherish your family's legacy, and I will see you in the next story.